Everyone says they want freedom, financial freedom, time freedom, creative freedom, the ability to wake up and choose their life instead of reacting to it. But very few people actually want what freedom costs. Because freedom is not free. It never has been, and it never will be. The price of freedom is daily discomfort, paid in small, unglamorous installments that most people refuse to make. See, people imagine freedom as a moment, one big win, one breakthrough, one viral hit, one lucky break that suddenly releases them from effort forever. That fantasy is why they quit. Because real freedom doesn't arrive as a reward. It is built as a habit. And habits are boring. Habits are repetitive. Habits are uncomfortable. Freedom is waking up early when you do not feel like it. It is saying no to easy pleasure because you are committed to a harder future. It is choosing to do the thing you could avoid, knowing avoidance feels good now, but costs you later. Every time you skip the work, you are not resting. You are borrowing against your future. And the interest rate is brutal. Most people are not trapped because they are unlucky. They are trapped because they are unlucky. They are trapped because they have optimized their lives for comfort. Comfort in conversations they avoid, comfort in routines they never change, comfort in excuses that protect their ego while stealing their potential. Comfort feels harmless, but it quietly builds a cage. And once the cage is built, people call it reality. Freedom works the opposite way. Freedom is built by choosing discomfort when no one is watching, training when motivation is gone, learning when motivation is gone, learning when confusion feels frustrating. Showing up when quitting would be easier. You do not earn freedom by intensity. You earn it by consistency. And consistency requires tolerance for discomfort. Here's the part no one wants to hear. The discomfort does not go away. You just get better at carrying it. And that is the point. The person who can tolerate more discomfort has more options, more leverage, more control. While everyone else is negotiating with their feelings, they are executing. Freedom is not about doing whatever you want. It is about doing what you must, long enough, so one day you actually can. Freedom is not a destination you arrive at one day and suddenly get to relax into forever. It is a daily transaction that must be paid for repeatedly, consciously and without exception. People talk about freedom as if it is a milestone, something unlocked after enough success, money, or recognition, but that framing is what keeps them stuck. When freedom is treated as a finish line, effort becomes temporary, discipline becomes negotiable, and discomfort becomes something to escape rather than embrace. In reality, freedom behaves more like rent than ownership. You do not pay once and keep the benefits permanently. You pay every day, and the currency is discomfort. Every meaningful form of freedom has a cost that shows up before the reward does. Financial freedom requires saying no to spending when you could easily afford to say yes, reinvesting when consumption would feel better, and continuing to work long after basic needs are met. Time freedom requires structure, boundaries, and often disappointing people in the short term to avoid being owned by their expectations in the long term. Personal freedom requires uncomfortable self-honesty, the willingness to confront weaknesses, and the discipline to change behaviors that feel familiar but destructive. None of these costs are dramatic or cinematic. They are quiet, repetitive, and mentally taxing, which is exactly why most people avoid them. Daily discomfort is the gatekeeper because it filters out those who want freedom in theory from those willing to earn it in practice. Anyone can say they value independence, autonomy, or control over their life. Very few are willing to feel the friction that comes with building it. Discomfort shows up as boredom when results are slow, frustration when progress is invisible, and doubt when effort is not immediately rewarded. It shows up when motivation disappears and routine is all that remains. The transaction happens in those moments. Either you pay the price and keep your freedom growing, or you default and hand control back to convenience, habit, and external circumstances. The mistake most people make is assuming discomfort is a sign they are doing something wrong. They interpret resistance as a warning instead of a confirmation. But discomfort is not an error signal. It is proof that you are operating outside the zone that keeps you dependent. Comfort maintains the status quo. Discomfort disrupts it. Every time you choose the harder option when an easier one is available, you are expanding your capacity for freedom. You are training yourself to act based on principle rather than impulse, and that ability compounds faster than talent or luck. What makes daily discomfort especially powerful is its cumulative effect. One uncomfortable choice rarely changes a life. Hundreds of them do. Waking up early once does not create discipline. Doing it when you do not feel like it again and again does. Skipping one indulgence does not create financial leverage. Making restraint a habit does. Speaking up once does not create confidence. Repeatedly choosing honest expression over social comfort does. Freedom grows in small increments, and each increment requires payment in advance. There's also no outsourcing this cost. You cannot delegate your discomfort to someone else. You cannot hack around it. You cannot wait for the right mood or the perfect conditions. The payment is personal, internal, and unavoidable. This is why so many people chase shortcuts, mentors, systems, or tactics, hoping to bypass the discomfort while keeping the reward. Those tools can accelerate progress, but they do not replace the price. At some point, you still have to do the uncomfortable work yourself. Daily discomfort also reframes sacrifice. When people hear sacrifice, they imagine loss. But the real loss comes from avoiding discomfort, not choosing it. Avoided discomfort does not disappear. It accumulates as dependence, regret, and limited options. The discomfort you choose today is the discomfort you do not have to endure later. The pain of discipline replaces the pain of constraint. One is voluntary and temporary. The other is imposed and persistent. Freedom, then, is not about eliminating discomfort from your life. It is about choosing which discomfort you will live with. The discomfort of effort, structure, and self-control, or the discomfort of stagnation, stress, and lack of control. One expands your options, the other shrinks them. When framed this way, daily discomfort stops being something to avoid and becomes something to seek deliberately, because it is the only reliable signal that you are buying more freedom rather than spending it away. Most people say they want freedom, but what they actually want is relief. They want the pressure to stop, the uncertainty to disappear, and the effort to feel easier. Freedom, however, is not the absence of effort. It is the result of sustained, intentional effort applied over time. The reason so few people attain it is not because freedom is rare or complex, but because the routine required to build it is boring, repetitive, and often thankless. People crave the outcome, but they resist the process. And that contradiction is where progress dies. The routine that creates freedom does not look impressive from the outside. It looks like doing the same fundamental actions long after the excitement is worn off. It looks like tracking numbers when you already know what they will say. It looks like practicing skills that feel painfully average before they become valuable. This kind of work offers no adrenaline rush and no instant validation, which makes it easy to abandon. Humans are wired to chase novelty and feedback, not consistency, and freedom demands consistency above all else. People often assume that once they're disciplined enough or motivated enough, the routine will feel easier. That assumption keeps them waiting instead of working. The truth is that the routine rarely becomes enjoyable. What changes is your tolerance for repetition and your understanding of its purpose. When you understand that each boring action is a deposit into future autonomy, the lack of excitement stops being a deal breaker. You stop asking whether you feel like doing the work and start asking whether you want the life it creates. The desire for freedom without routine shows up in how people approach goals. They plan aggressively but execute sporadically. They sprint when motivation is high and disappear when it drops. They confuse intensity with effectiveness and burn out, because intensity is impossible to sustain without structure. Routine is what stabilizes effort when emotions fluctuate. Without it, progress depends on mood, and mood is unreliable. This resistance to routine is also why people idolize breakthroughs. Breakthroughs are clean, dramatic, and easy to narrate. Routines are messy, slow, and difficult to explain. But breakthroughs are almost always the visible result of invisible repetition. The audience sees the moment. They do not see the months or years of dull execution that made it possible. When people chase freedom through breakthroughs instead of routines, they end up stuck in cycles of hope and disappointment. There is also an ego component. Routine humbles you. It forces you to confront how little progress one day of effort actually produces. It exposes gaps in skill and consistency that talent can temporarily hide. Many people avoid routine not because it is hard, but because it removes their ability to feel exceptional. It demands that they earn results the same way everyone else does, through repetition, patience, and restraint. Freedom built on routine is durable. Freedom built on luck or bursts of effort is fragile. When your life depends on systems instead of moods, you become harder to disrupt. Missed motivation does not derail you. External chaos does not knock you off course. This is what real freedom looks like in practice. Not the ability to do nothing, but the ability to keep moving regardless of internal or external conditions. The irony is that routine, which feels restrictive at first, is what ultimately creates flexibility. By doing the same things consistently, you reduce the number of decisions you have to make, conserve mental energy, and build predictable outcomes. Predictability creates leverage. Leverage creates options. Options are freedom. The person who avoids routine to feel free in the moment ends up trapped by randomness. The person who commits to routine feels constrained early but gains control later. When people say they want freedom but resist routine, what they are really saying is that they want the rewards of discipline without the identity change that discipline requires. Routine forces you to become someone different before you see different results. It reshapes how you think, act, and respond to discomfort. Without that transformation, freedom remains a fantasy rather than an outcome. In the end, freedom is not built by extraordinary days. It is built by ordinary days executed extraordinarily well. The routine is the price, and boredom is the receipt. Those who accept that trade quietly accumulate independence while others keep searching for a path that feels easier but never arrives. Comfort is attractive because it promises safety, stability, and relief from effort. But what it actually delivers over time is quiet dependence. It rarely announces itself as a threat. Instead, it shows up as reasonable choices, small concessions, and harmless shortcuts that feel justified in the moment. Each one reduces friction, and with less friction comes less resistance to staying exactly where you are. This is why comfort is so dangerous. It does not force failure. It invites stagnation and makes it feel responsible. At the beginning, comfort feels like balance. Rest after effort, ease after stress. There is nothing wrong with comfort in isolation. The problem is when comfort becomes the default decision-making framework. When the question shifts from what moves me forward to what feels easiest right now. Progress slows without anyone noticing. Over time, ease becomes a requirement rather than a reward, and anything that threatens it starts to feel unreasonable. Even when it is necessary, comfort compounds dependence in subtle ways. Financially, it looks like increasing expenses alongside income, locking future choices into past spending habits. Professionally, it looks like staying in roles that are familiar but limiting, because learning something new feels inconvenient. Personally, it looks like avoiding difficult conversations, tolerating misalignment, and choosing short-term peace over long-term clarity. None of these choices feel catastrophic on their own. Together, they build a life that is expensive to leave. Dependence grows because comfort reduces your tolerance for discomfort. The less you practice doing hard things, the harder they feel and they become unavoidable. This creates a feedback loop. You avoid discomfort because it feels overwhelming, and it feels overwhelming because you avoid it. Over time, the threshold for what feels difficult drops lower and lower. What once felt manageable starts to feel unbearable, and options shrink accordingly. This is why comfort often masquerades as self-care. People justify avoidance by framing it as protecting their mental health, preserving energy, or maintaining balance. While those things matter, they become excuses when they are used to avoid growth. True self-respect includes the willingness to face discomfort in service of a better future. When comfort is always prioritized, self-care quietly turns into self-confinement. Comfort also blunts urgency. When life is just comfortable enough, there is no immediate reason to change. The pain is not sharp enough to force action, but it is persistent enough to erode ambition. Dreams are delayed, then downsized, then reframed as unrealistic. People do not quit on their goals. They slowly negotiate them downward until they fit inside their comfort zone. What remains feels achievable, but it is rarely fulfilling. Most deceptive part of comfort is that it feels earned. After working hard, people believe they deserve ease. And in moderation, they do. But when earned comfort becomes permanent comfort, it shifts identity. You stop seeing yourself as someone who pushes boundaries and start seeing yourself as someone who protects equilibrium. Once that identity settles in, discomfort feels like a violation rather than a tool. Freedom requires the opposite orientation. It requires voluntary exposure to difficulty so that your capacity expands faster than your dependencies. This does not mean living in constant hardship. It means refusing to let comfort dictate your ceiling. It means using comfort strategically rather than habitually. Comfort becomes something you enjoy after effort, not something you organize your life around avoiding effort. When comfort is managed intentionally, it supports recovery and sustainability. When it is unmanaged, it becomes a leash. The more comfortable your life becomes without a corresponding increase in capability, the less room you have to move. Expenses rise faster than skills. Obligations multiply faster than leverage. You appear stable, but your flexibility disappears. Ultimately, comfort is seductive because it feels like progress without risk. But safety without growth is not security. It is dependence disguised as peace. The moment comfort stops being a choice and becomes a requirement, freedom starts to decay quietly, not through crisis, but through complacency. Pain is unavoidable. The only real choice anyone has is the timing and the source of it. Discipline hurts once a day because it requires conscious effort in the moment. Regret hurts every day because it lingers, multiplies, and replays itself without asking permission. This distinction is what most people fail to understand when they avoid discipline. They believe they're choosing less pain, when in reality, they're choosing a form of pain that is quieter, longer, and far more expensive. Discipline creates acute discomfort. It shows up as resistance when the alarm goes off early, friction when you choose work over entertainment, and tension when you say no to impulses that promise immediate relief. This pain is sharp but short-lived. It has a beginning and an end. Once the action is taken, the discomfort fades, often replaced by a sense of control or relief. Discipline demands presence, but it does not follow you around for the rest of the day. Regret, on the other hand, is chronic. It does not require effort to exist. It lives in reflection, comparison, and quiet moments when distraction fades. Regret grows stronger with time because it feeds on opportunity cost. Each missed action compounds into a narrative of what could have been done differently. Unlike discipline, regret offers no resolution. You cannot complete it and move on. You can only carry it. People underestimate regret because it is delayed. The pain of discipline is immediate and obvious, which makes it feel heavier. The pain of regret is abstract at first, which makes it easier to ignore. But delayed pain does not mean reduced pain, it means accumulated pain. What begins as a mild sense of disappointment hardens into resentment, self-doubt, and a persistent feeling of being behind. This is why regret often shows up later in life with disproportionate force. It has been compounding quietly for years. Another critical difference is agency. Discipline is chosen. Regret is endured. When you choose discipline, you are in control of the pain. You decide when it starts, how intense it is, and how long it lasts. That sense of control builds confidence even when the action itself is uncomfortable. Regret strips the control away. It replays past decisions without offering the ability to change them, leaving only reflection without leverage. Discipline also produces evidence. Each discipline action creates proof that you can do hard things. This proof builds self-trust, which reduces future friction. Over time, the same actions that once felt painful begin to feel neutral, even automatic. Regret produces the opposite. It erodes self-trust. Each avoided action becomes evidence that you cannot rely on yourself, which increases hesitation and avoidance the next time a choice appears. The daily nature of discipline is what makes it so powerful. Because it is applied consistently, the pain never has time to escalate. Small acts of discipline prevent large acts of correction later. A disciplined approach to health avoids medical crises. A disciplined approach to finances avoids desperation. A disciplined approach to skill building avoids career stagnation. Each small pain paid on time prevents a much larger pain from coming due. Regret, by contrast, grows heavier precisely because it is unpaid. Ignored obligations, delayed decisions, and postponed efforts accumulate interest. Eventually, the pain becomes unavoidable, but by then the cost is far higher. The action required to correct course feels overwhelming, which pushes people further into avoidance. What could have been solved with modest daily effort now demands radical change. People often frame discipline as restrictive, but it is actually liberating. It confines pain to a narrow window and prevents it from spreading into every area of life. Regret spreads. It bleeds into confidence, relationships, and decision-making. It becomes a background noise that influences choices even when you are not aware of it. Discipline hurts once because it is contained. Regret hurts every day because it is uncontained. The most important realization is that discipline does not eliminate pain. It chooses the most efficient form of it. It trades a small, predictable cost for the avoidance of a massive, unpredictable one. Once this trade-off is understood, discipline stops feeling like self-punishment and starts feeling like self-respect. You are no longer forcing yourself to suffer. You are protecting yourself from a far more punishing alternative that arrives quietly and stays indefinitely. Optionality is the true currency of freedom, and it is almost always purchased in advance through actions that feel uncomfortable at the time. Every difficult decision made today creates a wider range of choices tomorrow, while every easy decision narrows them. This relationship is not obvious in the moment because optionality compounds silently. The benefit does not announce itself immediately, which is why most people undervalue it and default to convenience instead. When you choose the uncomfortable path, you are rarely rewarded right away. Learning a difficult skill does not instantly increase your income. Saving and reinvesting money does not immediately change your lifestyle. Building discipline does not produce visible status. What it does produce is leverage. Leverage is the ability to say no, to wait, to walk away, or to pivot when conditions change. That leverage is optionality in action. It only exists because of earlier discomfort. Most people operate with low optionality because their past decisions were optimized for short-term relief. They built lives that function only under specific conditions: a certain income level, a certain job, a certain routine. Any disruption creates stress because there is no buffer. This fragility is not bad luck. It is the delayed consequence of choosing ease over investment. When discomfort is avoided, resilience is never built. Uncomfortable actions expand optionality by increasing capability and reducing dependency. Capability comes from doing things that stretch your current limits. Dependency comes from arranging your life so that comfort is required to function. The more capable you are, the fewer conditions you need to operate. The fewer conditions you need, the more freedom you have. This is why growth often feels uncomfortable before it feels empowering. Capability is formed under strain, not ease. Financial optionality is an obvious example. The person who consistently saves, reinvests, and controls lifestyle inflation experiences daily discomfort in the form of restraint. They say no to purchases they could justify. They delay gratification they could afford. In return, they gain the ability to leave bad situations, wait for better opportunities, and absorb risk without panic. The discomfort of restraint buys the comfort of choice later. The same principle applies to skills. Learning when you already feel tired, practicing when progress feels slow, and exposing yourself to feedback that highlights your shortcomings all feel uncomfortable. But those actions accumulate into competence. Competence creates alternatives. When you are good at something valuable, you are not forced to accept the first option presented to you. You can negotiate. You can decline. You can choose. Optionality grows in direct proportion to skill. Time optionality follows the same pattern. People who structure their days, protect focus, and maintain routines often feel constrained in the short term. Their schedules look rigid. Their habits look repetitive. But over time, those constraints produce efficiency. Efficiency creates time surplus. Time surplus creates freedom. Those who reject structure to feel free now often end up with chaotic days that leave them exhausted and reactive, with no real control over their time. Optionality also applies internally. Emotional and psychological flexibility come from repeatedly choosing the harder response over the easier one, having difficult conversations instead of avoiding them, facing uncertainty instead of numbing it, acting according to values instead of moods. Each uncomfortable choice strengthens self-trust. Self-trust expands internal optionality, the ability to respond intentionally rather than reflexively. The reason optionality matters so much is that it reduces the cost of mistakes. When you have options, a wrong decision is rarely catastrophic. You can adjust, recover, or try again. When you lack options, every decision feels heavy because the downside risk is pressure leads to fear-based choices, which further reduce optionality. It becomes a self-reinforcing cycle of constraint. Uncomfortable actions break that cycle. They front-load the costs so that future decisions become lighter. Instead of paying for every choice with anxiety, you pay once with effort and discipline. Over time, the accumulation of options changes how you experience life. You stop feeling cornered. You stop feeling rushed. You stop feeling trapped by past decisions. The paradox is that the path to more choices requires committing to fewer choices in the present. You choose the harder path repeatedly so that future you does not have to choose under desperation. Each act of discomfort is a quiet investment, invisible to others, but powerful in its effect. Optionality is never given. It is earned through the consistent willingness to do what is hard now, so that life does not become hard later. Freedom is rarely created through dramatic moments or sudden breakthroughs. It is built through small, boring, repetitive choices that look insignificant on their own but become transformative when compounded over time. People are drawn to stories of overnight success because they are simple and exciting, but those stories distort reality. They hide the unglamorous truth that freedom is the outcome of consistency, not intensity, and that consistency almost always feels dull while it is happening. Repetitive choices lack emotional payoff. There's no applause for showing up on time every day, managing your finances responsibly, or practicing the same skill again and again. These actions do not trigger excitement or validation, which makes them easy to dismiss. Humans are wired to respond to novelty and reward, not repetition. As a result, people assume that if something feels boring, it must not be important. In reality, boredom is often a signal that you are doing something sustainable. The power of repetition lies in its invisibility. Each small choice produces a marginal gain that is too small to notice in isolation. One workout does not change your body. One focused work session does not transform your career. One day of discipline does not create freedom. But these actions accumulate quietly. Over time, the gap between those who repeat the fundamentals and those who chase excitement becomes impossible to ignore. What once seemed trivial reveals itself as decisive. Dramatic breakthroughs tend to distract people from the real work. They encourage an all-or-nothing mindset, where progress is measured by milestones instead of momentum. When progress slows, motivation drops and effort stops. Repetitive systems do not rely on motivation. They operate regardless of how you feel. This makes them far more reliable. Freedom requires reliability because it is built over long timelines, not short bursts. Boring choices also reduce cognitive load. When decisions are standardized, energy is conserved for execution. You are not constantly negotiating with yourself about what to do next. This reduces friction and increases throughput. The person who relies on habits and systems can sustain effort longer than the person who relies on inspiration. Over time, the sustainability becomes a competitive advantage that looks like talent from the outside. There is also humility in repetition. Doing the same basic actions forces you to accept that progress is incremental. It removes the illusion that you are one clever idea away from escape. This can be uncomfortable for the ego, which prefers to feel exceptional. But humility is necessary for growth. It keeps you focused on what works rather than what impresses. The unglamorous nature of freedom-building choices is why they are so effective. Because they are boring, few people stick with them. This creates separation. The barrier to entry is not intelligence or resources, but patience. Those who are willing to be bored longer than others quietly accumulate advantage. While others look for faster paths, they are building foundations that do not collapse. Repetition also creates identity. When you do something consistently, it stops being an action and starts being who you are. You are no longer forcing discipline, you are expressing it. This identity shift is critical because it removes internal resistance. Acting in alignment with who you believe you are requires less effort than acting against it. Freedom becomes easier to maintain once it is tied to identity rather than willpower. Constraints play a role here as well. Repetitive choices often require structure and limits, which can feel restrictive at first. But constraints eliminate distraction and forced focus. Focus accelerates progress. Progress reinforces commitment. What begins as limitation ends as liberation. This is the paradox most people miss when they equate freedom with the absence of structure. Ultimately, the path to freedom is not exciting while you are walking it. It is quiet, methodical, and often lonely. But that is precisely why it works. The market rewards what is rare, and sustained boredom is rare. Those who embrace the monotony of disciplined choice eventually wake up to a life with more control, more leverage, and more freedom than those who spent their time chasing moments instead of building systems. Avoided discomfort does not disappear, it merely changes form and timing. When something feels difficult and you choose to delay or dodge it, the relief you experience is temporary. That relief you experience is temporary. That relief is not a solution. It is a postponement. What you are really doing is agreeing to face the same discomfort later, usually in a more intense and less controllable version. This is why avoided discomfort always returns with interest. In the moment, avoidance feels rational. The task feels overwhelming, the conversation feels risky, the effort feels draining. Choosing not to act reduces immediate stress, which the brain interprets as a win. But this short-term relief reinforces the behavior, teaching you that avoidance is a viable strategy. Over time, this conditioning makes discomfort feel increasingly threatening, even when the underlying issue remains small. Interest accumulates because problems grow when they are ignored. A missed workout becomes drow when they are ignored. A missed workout becomes declining health. An ignored expense becomes debt. A postponed conversation becomes resentment. Each delay adds layers of complexity that were not there originally. What could have been handled with modest effort now requires significant energy, emotional bandwidth, or resources to resolve. The discomfort itself is not just returned. It is multiplied. Avoidance also erodes confidence. Every time you choose not to act, you send yourself a signal that you cannot handle discomfort. The signal shapes your self-perception. You begin to see yourself as someone who avoids rather than confronts. When similar situations arise, hesitation increases, making action even less likely. The interest here is psychological. The cost is reduced self-trust, which makes future discomfort feel heavier than it objectively is. There's also a loss of control that comes with delayed discomfort. When you act early, you decide the terms. You choose the timing, the approach, and the scope of the pain. When you wait, circumstances often force action under pressure. Deadlines tighten, options narrow, emotions escalate. What was once a choice becomes a crisis. The discomfort you avoided now dictates your behavior instead of you directing it. This pattern shows up clearly in health. Skipping small habits feels harmless until symptoms appear. At that point, the intervention required is far more invasive than the original habit would have been. It shows up in relationships, where unspoken issues harden into distance. It shows up in careers, where neglected skill development leads to obsolescence. In each case, the interest is paid in stress, urgency, and regret. Avoided discomfort also compounds socially. People who consistently dodge difficult actions become unreliable, not because they intend to be, but because avoidance creates inconsistency. Promises are delayed, decisions are deferred, others adjust their expectations downward, which limits opportunities. This reputational interest is subtle but powerful. It closes doors quietly while leaving the person confused about why options seem to disappear. The illusion of avoidance is that it preserves energy. In reality, it drains it. Carrying unfinished tasks, unresolved issues, and deferred decisions creates mental load. This background stress consumes attention and reduces focus. The energy you thought you were saving is spent managing anxiety and guilt instead. When discomfort is faced directly, it often resolves faster and with less total energy expenditure. Choosing to face discomfort early reverses this compounding effect. Action collapses uncertainty. Even when the outcome is not ideal, clarity reduces stress. Small discomfort handled promptly prevents large discomfort later. This is why disciplined people often appear calm. They are not immune to difficulty. They simply do not let it accumulate. The interest on avoided discomfort is not linear. It accelerates. The longer something is delayed, the faster the cost grows. This creates a tipping point where action feels impossible, not because it actually is, but because the accumulated weight distorts perception. At that stage, people often label themselves lazy or incapable, when the real issue is unpaid discomfort that has been compounding for too long. Facing discomfort early is not about being aggressive or extreme. It is about being timely. It is the discipline of addressing things while they are still manageable. This habit keeps life light. It prevents small issues from becoming defining problems. Those who understand this principle learn to treat discomfort like a bill that must be paid immediately, knowing that delaying payment only increases the total cost and reduces their freedom to choose when and how to settle it. The difference between a life that feels trapped and one that feels free is rarely intelligence, talent, or opportunity. It is the capacity to tolerate discomfort for longer than others without needing immediate relief. This tolerance determines how far someone can move beyond their current circumstances. When discomfort is avoided, growth stalls. When it is endured intentionally, expansion becomes inevitable. Discomfort is the threshold every meaningful change must cross. Learning new skills feels awkward before it feels natural. Building strength feels painful before it feels empowering. Taking responsibility feels heavy before it feels stabilizing. Those early sensations are not indicators of failure, they're indicators of transition. The problem is that most people interpret discomfort as a signal to stop, rather than a signal that something new is being built. Trapped individuals often believe their limitation is external. They blame lack of time, resources, or support. While constraints exist, the deeper limitation is internal tolerance. The moment discomfort appears, effort drops, plans are revised, standards are lowered. Over time, this pattern trains a person to stay within a narrow range of experience where nothing truly challenges them. That range feels safe, but is also confining. Free individuals are not immune to discomfort. They simply expect it and plan for it. They understand that feeling uncomfortable does not require immediate correction. This mindset allows them to stay engaged when progress is slow or unclear. They do not need constant reassurance or visible results to continue. Their tolerance gives them staying power, and staying power is what creates disproportionate outcomes. Tolerance for discomfort is built, not inherited. Each time someone stays present in difficulty instead of escaping it, their capacity expands slightly. This is why voluntary discomfort is so powerful. It strengthens the ability to remain effective under pressure. Over time, situations that once felt overwhelming become manageable, and what is manageable becomes routine. The environment does not change, the person does. Low tolerance creates urgency for relief. High tolerance creates patience. Patience creates leverage. When you are not rushed by discomfort, you can make better decisions. You can make better decisions, you can wait for better opportunities. You can think long-term instead of reacting emotionally. Those with low tolerance are constantly negotiating with their feelings, which keeps them reactive and constrained. This difference shows up clearly in careers. Many people quit roles, projects, or paths, not because they are wrong, but because the discomfort phase lasts longer than expected. Mastery is delayed gratification by definition. Those who can tolerate the awkward middle stage, where effort is high and feedback is low, eventually separate themselves. Those who cannot keep restarting at beginner level, never staying long enough to compound skill. The same pattern appears financially. Short-term sacrifice feels uncomfortable, so people maintain lifestyles that match or exceed their income. This keeps them dependent on continued earnings. Those who tolerate the discomfort of restraint gain the freedom to absorb risk, change direction, or step away when needed. The discomfort is the same type, the outcome is radically different. Emotionally, tolerance for discomfort determines the quality of relationships. Difficult conversations are uncomfortable, but avoiding them creates distance and resentment. Those who can tolerate the discomfort of honesty build trust and depth. Those who cannot remain polite but disconnected, mistaking the absence of conflict for harmony. But trapped life is not usually dramatic, it is quiet. Days blur together. Progress feels incremental but directionless. The free life is not always comfortable. It involves responsibility, pressure, and self-imposed standards. The difference is agency. One feels stuck inside conditions, the other feels capable of navigating them. When discomfort tolerance increases, the world opens up. New options appear not because circumstances change, but because the person can now handle what those options require. Responsibilities that once felt burdensome become manageable. Risks that once felt terrifying become calculated. Freedom expands in proportion to the weight you can carry. This is why the gap between trapped and free is not motivation or desire. Almost everyone wants better outcomes. The gap is the willingness to feel uncomfortable without immediately seeking escape. Those who cultivate that willingness gradually remove the invisible walls around their lives, while those who do not remain confined by the limits of what feels easy and familiar. Most people associate freedom with the absence of rules, schedules, and limits, but this assumption is backward. A life without structure does not create freedom. It creates chaos, reactivity, and exhaustion. True freedom is not the ability to do anything at any time. It is the ability to do what matters consistently without being hijacked by distraction, impulse, or circumstance. That level of control only emerges when structure and constraints are deliberately imposed. Structure removes friction from execution. When decisions are made in advance, energy is preserved for action rather than debate. Without structure, every task requires a fresh negotiation with mood and motivation. That constant decision-making drains focus and increases the likelihood of avoidance. What feels like flexibility at first becomes mental clutter. Structure simplifies life by narrowing choices in the present so that progress becomes inevitable rather than optional. Constraints work because they eliminate noise. Unlimited options sound appealing, but they paralyze action. When everything is possible, nothing is prioritized. Constraints force clarity. A fixed schedule forces you to decide what deserves attention. A limited budget forces you to distinguish between wants and needs. A defined process forces you to focus on execution rather than endless planning. These limits feel restrictive only until their benefits become visible. The paradox is that structure feels like control being taken away in the short term, while it actually creates control over time. When you commit to routines, standards, and boundaries, you reduce exposure to randomness. Randomness is the enemy of freedom because it keeps you reactive. Reactive people are always responding, never directing. Structure shifts you from reaction to intention. This is especially visible in time management. People who reject schedules often claim they want to feel free. In practice, their days are dictated by interruptions, urgent requests, and emotional drift. They feel busy but ineffective. Those who schedule their time may appear constrained, but they decide where their attention goes. Over weeks and months, this control compounds into greater output, better opportunities, and more discretionary time. The constraint creates the freedom it initially seemed to remove. Financial structure operates the same way. Budgets, savings rules, and spending limits feel confining to those accustomed to impulse. But without them, money decisions are made emotionally, leading to instability and dependence. Financial constraints create predictability. Predictability creates safety. Safety creates optionality. The person who operates within clear financial rules can take risk when it matters because the foundation is stable. Creative freedom is also often misunderstood. Many believe creativity thrives without rules. In reality, constraints sharpen creativity. Deadlines force focus. Formats force clarity. Standards force refinement. Unlimited freedom leads to unfinished ideas and abandoned projects. Constraints provide a container within which creativity can be expressed consistently. This is why professionals produce more than amateurs. They work within systems, not moods. Structure also protects against self-sabotage. Humans are inconsistent by nature. Motivation fluctuates. Emotions distort judgment. Structure acts as a stabilizer. It ensures that progress continues even when internal conditions are unfavorable. This reliability is what builds trust in yourself. When you know you will act regardless of how you feel, confidence increases. Confidence reduces friction, increases. Confidence reduces friction, increases freedom. Constraints also create measurable progress. When rules are clear, outcomes can be tracked. Tracking enables adjustment. Adjustment leads to optimization. Without structure, there is nothing to refine because nothing is consistent. People who avoid structure often feel stuck not because they are incapable, but because their efforts are scattered and unmeasurable. Structure concentrates effort, making improvement visible. There is a deeper psychological benefit as well. Structure reduces anxiety. Ambiguity creates stress because the brain is constantly scanning for threats and decisions. Clear constraints calm that noise. When expectations are defined, attention can be directed outward toward execution rather than inward toward uncertainty. This mental clarity is a form of freedom that is rarely acknowledged but deeply felt. Those who resist structure often confuse discipline with punishment. They see rules as external impositions rather than self-chosen tools. The difference is intent. When structure is imposed by circumstances, it feels oppressive. When it is designed intentionally, it feels empowering. You are not following rules because you have to. You are following them because they protect what matters to you. Over time, structure fades into the background. What once felt rigid becomes normal. What once required effort becomes automatic. At that point, the benefits are undeniable. Life feels lighter, not heavier. Decisions feel clearer, not restricted. Freedom emerges not as chaos, but as control earned through consistency and self-imposed limits that quietly expand what is possible. Long-term success is rarely about brilliance or luck. It is about consistently choosing what is hard now to avoid what will be even harder later. This principle underpins everything meaningful in life because discomfort is inevitable. The question is whether it is self-imposed or externally enforced. Those who embrace short-term difficulty gain leverage and freedom, while those who chase ease discover that life eventually imposes far harsher costs. Understanding this dynamic is the key to sustained achievement. Choosing the hard path early requires foresight. It demands the ability to see beyond immediate gratification and recognize that the pain you feel today can prevent amplified suffering in the future. This is why self-discipline is often framed as sacrifice, but it is more accurate to frame it as investment. Every uncomfortable choice made in the present builds resilience, competence, and options that reduce the likelihood of regret, crisis, or forced compromise later. The discomfort is temporary, but the benefits compound indefinitely. The natural human tendency is to avoid pain. People instinctively seek relief, comfort, and certainty. This is why delayed gratification is so counterintuitive. The easy path feels rewarding immediately, but does not scale. Skipping practice, avoiding responsibility, or postponing learning may feel good for a day or a week, but the cumulative cost multiplies quietly. Opportunities missed, habits unformed, and skills undeveloped accumulate interest in the form of future limitations that feel much more painful than the initial effort ever would have. One area where this principle is visible is skill development. The beginner phase is inherently uncomfortable. Effort seems unrewarded, mistakes are frequent, and progress is slow. Many quit because the pain of learning overshadows the reward. But those who persist, who tolerate awkwardness and repetition, build a foundation that compounds over time. The difficulty experienced early allows mastery later to feel effortless in comparison. What was hard initially eventually becomes a source of freedom and leverage. Financial discipline operates under the same law. Saving, investing, and managing spending feels restrictive when immediate desires are strong. It is tempting to spend money on instant pleasure, delaying hard decisions like budgeting, taxation, or reinvestment. But the costs of postponement accumulate quietly. Debt, missed opportunity, and dependence on unstable income amplify the discomfort later. By enduring the temporary pain of restraint today, future flexibility and optionality increase dramatically. Hard choices early create safety nets that prevent catastrophic stress in the future. Time management and focus are additional examples. It is uncomfortable to say no to distractions, structure your day, or push through tedious work. The short-term pain of discipline feels unpleasant, but the payoff is a consistent output of results and control over your life. Ignoring discipline in the moment leads to reactive existence later, deadlines missed, opportunities lost, and stress multiplied. The hard choice up front prevents the far larger unavoidable costs that would emerge otherwise. Relationships are governed by the same dynamic. Difficult conversations, honest feedback, and boundary setting feel awkward or painful initially. Avoiding them creates short-term comfort. However, avoiding relational discomfort compounds tension, misunderstanding, and resentment over time. The effort of addressing conflict early prevents the far greater difficulty of broken trust or alienation later. Choosing the hard path to relationships builds stability, respect, and connection that are otherwise impossible to manufacture after the damage is done. This principle also applies to health. Exercise, diet control, and preventative care all require consistent, sometimes tedious effort that feels uncomfortable in the present. Skipping workouts or indulging in harmful habits produces temporary ease, but compounds into long-term physical and mental stress. The discomfort of discipline is a small, calculated investment. The pain of neglect becomes unavoidable, heavier, and often irreversible over time. Emotional resilience is another arena where this principle manifests. Facing fears, confronting uncertainty, and taking responsibility for mistakes are intrinsically uncomfortable. Avoiding these challenges creates temporary relief, but prolongs dependence on avoidance patterns. Over time, accumulated emotional immaturity or avoidance creates situations that force you into extreme discomfort, often under less favorable circumstances. Choosing to confront difficulties early prevents compounded suffering later. The overarching truth is that life does not avoid discomfort, it enforces it. You can either choose when and how to experience it, or allow it to hit with amplified force later. Deliberate hardship, when applied strategically and consistently, creates leverage. It transforms temporary pain into long-term control, flexibility, and freedom. Avoidance, by contrast, magnifies future discomfort and reduces options, leaving people reactive rather than proactive. Those who master the art of choosing what is hard now learn to see discomfort as a tool rather than a threat. They develop foresight, self-discipline, and resilience. They understand that every difficult decision is an investment in future freedom, and every act of avoidance is a debt that compounds in invisible ways. This mindset separates those who achieve lasting results from those who constantly struggle, trapped in cycles of short-term relief and long-term regret. In the end, freedom is not handed to anyone. It is earned moment by moment, choice by choice. It is built on the willingness to sit with discomfort, to do the hard things others avoid, and to invest in the long term while resisting short-term ease. Those who embrace daily discomfort understand that every challenge faced today is a payment toward a life of control, optionality, and independence tomorrow. Freedom is never free, but when you commit to its price, you unlock not just what you can do, but who you become in the process.